First then, Leeds awoke this morning to find the nation had decided to leave the European Union, hours after the city itself had voted to stay. Leeds voted to remain by the narrowest of margins, with just 50.3% backing EU membership, bucking the trend for the rest of Yorkshire, which overwhelmingly rejected Remain.
Brexit, the two syllables that will likely be the lasting political legacy of 2016, this side of the pond. The June 23rd result dominated political discussion locally and nationally in the months before and the months after. By no means the only event of significance, but one that has coloured almost every issue since, as our city, like the nation, reacted to the decision of the British public. A decision that was at odds with that of Leeds itself. The Leeds vote was the most marginal of any city in the country, earning it the title of the 50-50 city. Raising the question, is the city more divided than anyone predicted? What can be done about this division? And where does our city stand compared to the start of the Brexit year? Leeds began 2016 with one of the worst New Year's Day hangovers imaginable. The city still coming to terms with the damage inflicted by Storm Eva, providing some of the earliest political ammunition of the calendar year. The flood damage provided Leeds City Council with a natural exclamation mark to their continued calls for an easing of austerity and greater infrastructure investment. But in a year of upheaval, the issues facing Leeds City Council at the start of the year were nothing if not consistent, floods aside, with the financial struggles that had defined the Cameron government for years. February's budget saw the authority facing £72 million in budget savings in the face of continuing cuts to support grants from Westminster.
We've made a commitment to do everything we possibly can to protect frontline services as best we can, but it's increasingly a challenge. So we've already lost 2,500 posts from the council structure. We'll be looking at losing more.
For the most part, politics at the local level remained thoroughly undramatic. May's council elections failing to see a single council ward change hands, and Leeds' bid for a devolution deal continued to stall, as other authorities moved towards greater local power wielded by city mayors. But at this point, the drama was elsewhere, as the EU referendum campaign was well underway. The battle for the hearts and minds of the Leeds electorate was in many ways a microcosm of the national referendum campaign. A diverse metropolitan city with a large student population, but with a strong contingent of traditionally Labour-supporting white working-class voters, a demographic split which experts would later highlight as a key divide between Leave and Remain camps. And the campaigns fought in Leeds reflected that split, Remain focusing on the economic arguments and Liberal young voters, Leave on immigration and political alienation.
Remain's emphasis seems to be more on set-piece events where they have selected audiences and the big politicians speaking for their side of it. We're very much a grassroots campaign and talking to ordinary folk down at the street level.
By being part of the European Union, we increase our opportunities to work, to travel, to make the most of our talents, to make the most of our country. I think that is one of the things that most inspires young people, but I think it's also about the sort of country and the sort of world they want. A country and a world where you recognise we have to cooperate to solve the problems that we face, whether that's climate change or pollution or fighting terrorism. These are things that countries do best when they do them together.
These arguments were weighed and assessed in town halls and community centres across the city, as residents came to challenge and be challenged by those hoping to win their vote.
Hillary, you'd sooner be in the room doing the negotiations. Why? Because they don't listen to you.
So my job is building roads, bridges, railways and the like. Now I have a real problem with the skills gap, but having the access to an open market, meaning I can go anywhere in Europe and in the UK to find those skills and those people to build a road, is quite important.
With the polls narrowing by the week in the midst of fiery rhetoric, the EU campaigning continued to build what seemed like unstoppable momentum. Momentum that ceased, abruptly, in a small village that few outside of West Yorkshire had ever heard of.
Left-hand side, and I saw Jo leaning on her hand, sat down in a posture of knees up, her head tilted back, her face bleeding and blood running down her legs. she was still alive then.
The political assassination of Batley and Spen MP Joe Cox by a right-wing extremist halted the campaign where it stood. News began to surface that Joe's murderer Tommy Mair had shouted nationalist slogans during the act, indicating to many that the polarisation caused by the debate had reached its boiling point.
She was taken from us in an act of hatred, in a vile act that has killed her. It's an attack on democracy, what happened yesterday. It's the well of hatred that killed her.
The effects of Joe's death will be felt, personally, throughout the region for years to come. But in the short term, her murder led to vows from both sides to limit inflammatory rhetoric in the final sprint towards polling day, with the final polls showing a neck-and-neck race, with Remain marginally ahead. A margin which shrunk and shrunk as the hours of the night grew smaller. The shock Brexit result threw conventional political logic to the wind, surprising members of both camps, who were both left with difficult questions to answer as the sun rose on Brexit Britain. For Leave, there was the growing economic uncertainty as panic seemed to strike the financial markets. For the council-controlling Labour group, the sobering thought that many of their core supporters were not with them on this issue.
Well, I mean, I'm not an economist, but my view is that, you know, we can expect a few months really, but I think it all comes down to now, it's got to be strong leadership, a strong government, and that'll help determine how the markets go really.
I think there's been a very clear message that people are very disconnected, particularly from national politics, and I think we now have to listen even more.
The political casualties of Brexit followed hard on the result's heels, with local MPs called on to evaluate their political allegiances following Cameron's resignation and a rebellion by Labour MPs against Jeremy Corbyn over his perceived failure to rally those traditional Labour voters. Also following in the wake of the referendum were increasing reports of hate crime committed against ethnic minorities. In Leeds, the most high-profile case was the serious assault of 2 Polish men in Armley by a gang of 20 youths, an incident that sparked efforts by West Yorkshire Police and the Polish consulate to address directly the community's concerns.
2 of my kids face first time in past 5 years the hate crime. They've been told, do you want to borrow bag to pack yourself? We hate Polish people, they take jobs from our parents.
With official figures showing a slight increase in hate crime since Brexit, West Yorkshire Police resolved to boost recruitment of minority officers. But that wasn't the only impetus generated by Brexit. The Leeds City region had so far been unable to secure a deal for devolved powers, like its northern counterparts in Manchester and Liverpool, both set for mayoral elections next year. But negotiations for Leeds and West Yorkshire had failed to resolve the question of where the boundary of a devolved authority centred on Leeds would be drawn.
West Yorkshire combined authorities, for the most part, dominated by the Labour Party. Whereas if they are going to include also areas in North Yorkshire, then of course in those parts of the region you see also the presence of Conservative politicians. So perhaps that would mean create new political relationships, and maybe not all the parts that are included in the deal are prepared to do that.
But the economic and social challenges raised by Brexit seems to have provided fresh incentive to bring power even closer to home, for Leeds and other northern cities to pull away from Westminster and find their own path to post-Brexit prosperity. With the prospect of a joint northern negotiating team for Brexit, championed by devolved authorities with greater powers to hold Westminster to account.
And so I would really encourage colleagues here in West Yorkshire or across Yorkshire more generally to, hopefully come to an agreement so that we can build the voice of the North together, because I've got a real interest in people here kind of joining with us, joining with Merseyside, and as I say, making sure then that we get that extra weight on the national stage that the North of England needs.
The decision of the British people on June 23rd may have gone against Leeds by a fraction, but Leeds is now just as much a part of Brexit Britain as those areas that did vote to leave. It's now up to Leeds how it reacts as a city, how it re-examines its internal relationships between divided communities, and what role it will play in a Britain beyond Europe.